What is rhythm, timbre, and accentuation in music are also elements of good architecture.
Ely Jacques Kahn was very much a New York architect and helped create the iconic skyline that we think of.
If Kahn were here to speak for himself, he would say it doesn't take much to jazz up the surface of a building.
Hillary Clinton was here, so I got to meet her. I got to shake her hand.
It's no wonder people still talk about him, as he built more than 4 skyscrapers in Manhattan. They give the city its color and rhythm. For example, here at Fashion Avenue, New York's fashion hub, or on Broadway with its theaters and music studios. He also set clear accentuations along elegant Park Avenue and downtown on Wall Street. Ely Jacques Kahn designed his first house about 100 years ago, and its front design was instantly awarded a gold medal. It shows a classic aloofness, with its stylistic nuances from the style that the French call Louis XVI. He was often inspired by the French style, by Paris, where he had studied.
He loved Europe. He loved Paris. I think he probably saw his relationship to Paris and the French as the most important influence in his life. But he would go to Austria on vacation. What I miss is that I have not yet had the opportunity to go back to Europe and retrace some of his steps. I'd like to see Vienna, and I want to see Hohenems, and I'm going to make that happen.
This summer, about 200 visitors from Italy, France and the UK, from Belgium, Israel and Australia came to visit Hohenems, a small town in Vorarlberg, Austria. And particularly many came from the US, where a special society organizes such family reunions. We all want to know where we originate from. Who doesn't want to get insight in the previous century's history, especially if they can examine it through their own ancestors' eyes?
Well, I think a lot of the descendants, many of them don't even know that they were Jewish descendants. They don't know that they came from Hohenems. My family didn't know that until fairly recently. And so it's wonderful to discover your history. And I don't think there's any other town in Europe where the town's mission, the museum's mission, is to know the history of all of the people who lived here and where their descendants went.
My father always told me that our family originated from Hohenems. It's a special place for us. We left Hohenems because we wanted to live elsewhere. But our family lived here for more than 200 years.
Ely Jacques Kahn's ancestors also found their rest here. But young Jakob Kahn left the old Jewish settlement of Hohenems in 1871.
His father died in 1858. His mother remarried and sent young Jakob to a boarding school in western Switzerland. He learned to speak French there, and he had to cope with living apart from his family and his hometown. Around 1870, he went to New York and built a life there. He got married and had several children with his wife. Many Jews from Hohenems shared a similar fate.
Das war die Erfahrung ganz vieler Juden aus Hohenems.
Is it the resting place of their families that kept the Jewish community of Hohenems united? Is it their faith? Or did the families stay in contact with each other throughout the centuries? Were their family bonds stronger than we could ever imagine today? Jacques Kahn, who emigrated to New York, stayed in contact with the old world. His business with glassware and decorated mirrors was so successful in New York that he soon established subsidiaries in Paris, which kept his connection with Europe and his home intact. He visited Hohenems every year. As an only son, Ely Jacques Kahn was supposed to take over his father's business, but he refused. His parents were sympathetic and agreed to let him go to university.
It's great for Columbia. I think we're very proud to have Ely Jacques Kahn as a representative of the university. He started in 1899 at Columbia as an undergrad, and then he kept going and went to graduate school, the School of Architecture here at Columbia.
The goal of his studies was achieving a universal knowledge of historical architectural styles. A talented draftsman like Ely Jacques Kahn must have enjoyed copying the different styles and works, but he missed the practical work, the exchange with the builders. As a student, he already knew that a building was more than a decorated enclosure. His generation realized that skyscrapers would be useless without electrical power, running water, elevators, and air conditioning. But the academic world was blind towards these innovations and failed to recognize their brilliant students' talent.
His dealings with layouts and ground plans showed a certain playful virtuosity. Of course, they were functional, but at second glance also showed major architectural qualities.
Qualitäten darüber hinaus haben, die dann absolut architektonische sind.
It was nice to get a diploma, but we wanted to see the world. We wanted to explore old Europe. Ely knew his way around. He was a European at heart. Everybody fancied Paris at the time, so did we. It was our preferred destination.
In 1907, Ely Jacques Kahn arrived in Paris, the most exciting city back then. It was the capital of charm and esprit, chic and elegance. Especially young, ambitious Americans were magically attracted by this city. Its rich history merged with a promising present. Picasso did his paintings here. Stravinsky wrote his compositions, and Hemingway his novels. And Coco Chanel designed the costumes for the Ballet Russe. Ely Jacques Kahn wasn't the only architect who was fond of dancing, defining space by the movement of beautiful bodies. He enrolled at the École des Beaux-Arts. This institution had an enormous impact on the architecture of the New World.
As a former student at Columbia University, Kahn was familiar with European culture, as the curriculum there was based on the French curriculum. Together with the knowledge he acquired at the École, he gained a broad cultural knowledge as well as technical expertise.
This was Ely Jacques Kahn's goal. At the École, the planning process was at the core of everything. First, standardized building layouts were developed, and then the architect added the decor to the facade. Kahn worked at the studio of architect Gaston Redon, who was responsible for the conversion of the prestigious Pavillon de Masson at the Louvre. The École's graduates were supposed to be painters, sculptors, and engineers at the same time, and Ely Jacques Kahn met all these requirements. He finished his degree with the best possible certificate, the Prix Labarre. He spent the summer in Hohenems, where his sister Rena also lived. She had married Rudolf Rosenthal, whose family owned a flourishing clothing company and was very influential in the region.
Mein Vater hat immer über die Fabrik gesprochen.
My father always told me how important the factory was, and that his grandfather had gone to Vienna in order to establish a representative there.
Fabrik, die Fabrik. Es war notwendig für die Fabrik, jemand in Wien zu haben, jemand in Birmingham zu haben.
There was someone in Birmingham, someone in Trieste. All of the children went away, but they always kept Hohenems in their hearts.
Die Idee vom Hohenems verloren.
The Rosenthals were highly regarded. They were a generous, sophisticated, liberal family. Rainer and Rudolf moved into the elegant family mansion. Like every young couple, they refurbished their nest. They found inspiration in Vienna, where architecture was lifted by a new spirit. This could be best seen at the post office. Otto Wagner's building design was a manifesto of these new ideas. Beauty lies in practicability. This motto was the foundation for each little detail.
This intention can be seen in all modern architecture. Lose all baggage, everything that's not necessary. Light plays a major part in this. Every room shall be filled with light.
Joseph Hoffman was one of Otto Wagner's disciples, and he later became a major influence for Ely Jacques Kahn. He founded the Vienna workshop.
Well, I would say that Kahn, because his family was from Austria, and his sister lived in Hohenems, Austria, for a number of years from roughly 1900 to 1910, that he was very familiar with the Wiener Werkstätte design and the Hoffman design.
It was a design that inspired both Rainer Rosenthal and her brother Ely Jacques Kahn, and that is best displayed at the Purkersdorf Sanatorium. Especially the building's simplicity makes it so convincing. Hoffman tried to achieve a work of art that includes both its architecture and its interior design. He designed every little detail, from the furniture to the lamps. And Purkersdorf wasn't an isolated case. Hoffman founded the Vienna workshop and managed it for 30 years. Furniture, everyday objects, jewelry, everything was handcrafted in an extraordinary quality. And the design shaped a whole era.
As you can see, Rainer and Ely didn't take Hoffmann's design pieces to Hohenems. They returned to New York instead. When Rainer opened her store there, it soon became legendary.
There was something special to it. I can't recall any other store that impressed me that much, up until I was much older.
Und ich erinnere mich an das Geschäft, als doch es
I once met Rainer there, and I remember it as if it was yesterday.
Sehr lang und dünn.
It was a very small store, long and narrow, and it had a magical atmosphere to it.
Rainer and Rudolf established their design and furnishing store here in Madison Avenue. They imported works from Viennese manufacturers like Hagenauer or Rohak, designers like Ernst Schwadron, Wally Wieseltier, or Paula Hoffman worked for them and made sure that, as Ely Jacques Kahn's cousin Adele put it, modern things found their way into New York.
Ely Jacques Kahn also returned to New York, and he had to face a special challenge. For the first time, a zoning resolution was issued for the city. The reason for this was the Equitable Building, a new skyscraper that cast a huge shadow over many of the surrounding buildings.
And so it was these beautiful setbacks that were really to keep within the regulation that's created this New York style. And it was a design restriction, but Kahn and other architects at the time really embraced that and turned it into a beautiful aspect of our city.
Kahn was very well prepared for his profession. He had learned in Paris how to show flexibility when working with a building layout and had studied a modern use of forms in Vienna. He started working as an architect at the Garment District, the city's fashion hub. What distinguished him from other architects was his experimental treatment of the setbacks, but also his very refined ornamentation. At this building from 1923, he played with Islamic motifs. Open work stone, lilies and roses, which are also dominant in the lobby.
Most of Kahn's buildings were commercial buildings, so that they were buildings that depended on the rental of having clients that would rent the space and businesses that rented the space. And so the status, is sort of the entrance and the lobby set the tone for the building. And many of Kahn's buildings were developed by entrepreneurs who were catering to a little better level of clientele. He was able to convince his clients that this was an important investment.
Due to his pictorial imagination, the movie industry soon cast an eye on Kahn. And he was assigned to build a collective film centre for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Universal and First National Pictures. The unusual decor in the lobby picked up design elements from Vienna, adding pre-Columbian motifs.
So each floor will show the number of what floor you're on, but it looks like the beginning of an old movie. We kept the existing concrete floors, and then we try to keep some details with the brass, and you can see the original elevator call lights. So when this building was built in the 20s, they designed it as a film center to store nitrate films and cater to film businesses. So nitrate films were very flammable films, and they had to be stored in temperature controlled and fire retardant rooms. So if there was a fire or any problems, everything was contained and went up to the roof. So at one point back in the 30s, Warner Brothers was in this building, and they kept all their film storage on the different floors.
Back then, Jack Warner and the other film moguls considered New York the capital of the movie industry, and Ely Jacques Kahn was their preferred architect for several decades to come.
This is number 2 Park Avenue here, designed by Ely Jacques Kahn and opened in 1928. It's one of the most beautiful Art Deco office buildings in New York, I think. Kahn moved his own office into this building when it opened in 1928, which is what architects often do. They create a masterpiece, and so they want to have their own office in it. The colored parts up at the top are terracotta. That's Latin for baked earth. So it's a ceramic. It's easy to work with, it's cheap, it's fireproof, and it has the same color all the way through the block. And it's a good way to get a lot of different colors very vividly that will last in spite of weathering.
Well, this is definitely my favorite building that my great-grandfather built. One of my career goals is to, my next company, I have a company right now, it's based out of Boston, a cybersecurity company, but I'm already thinking about my next company, and I think it'll be based here in New York. And I've already told the management here at this building, 2 Park Avenue, that to let me know if any office space becomes available, because a dream of mine is to have my office in the building that my great-grandfather built.
The majestic lobby, the crown jewel of 2 Park Avenue, hasn't lost any of its magic. Its design became Ely Jacques Kahn's benchmark.
You see this form appear that looks like it was inspired by electrical or mechanical parts. And you see these finely drawn lines, parallel lines. That is the sort of thing that could not have been done by hand. It had to have been pressed out on a machine. And Art Deco means, among other things, the celebration of the machine age. In the 1920s, the spirit of the age was full steam ahead for modern technology and machines.
Wall Street completed the successful architect's portfolio. He placed two of his thoroughly designed jewels in between an ensemble of unaspiring office buildings. And then he set foot on historical grounds. This is where George Washington assumed office as the first president of the United States. A mosaic in the entrance area serves as a reminder of this event. The building's foundation was the biggest challenge in the history of modern engineering so far, as the tidal pressure of the East River potentiated the difficulties of building next to a stream.
I'd walk around, I'd see these amazing things that my great-grandfather had left behind, and I had his name. And I think it created some expectations early on in my life that I also needed to build things and do things that could stand the test of time.
The skyscrapers that still define the city's outline were built at the peak of the building boom. William van Eylen's shining Chrysler Building and Ely Jacques Kahn's snow-white marble block, the Scrib Building. The architects came up with some unique costumes for the 1931 New Year's Eve party. They were still unaware of the coming financial crisis.
The Squib Building was Ely Jacques Kahn's pride and joy. He even dressed up as the building when he went to the Beaux-Arts party in 1931, even though it was only halfway rented out. But then, New York, and of course, Ely Jacques Kahn's company suffered from the Great Depression. The speculation bubble that he also fed on had burst, and it became more and more difficult to get these buildings financed.
The real estate market hit rock bottom. Ely wasn't able to build anything for almost 10 years, and he was forced to fire almost all of his employees. Luckily, he was able to focus on doing interior design for restaurants and shops. And it was helpful that his head designer, Wolfgang Hoffmann, had always maintained contacts with Austria.
Wolfgang Hoffmann was the son of architect Josef Hoffmann, who had founded the Vienna workshop. His porcelain wares are still manufactured there. The same goes for Wally Wieseltier, who had followed Ely Jacques Kahn to New York and worked on the Scrib Building with him. From 1938, such professional achievements were of utmost importance to her and some of her colleagues from Vienna workshop.
Kahn was very generous. A few people, for example, I'll give you one example. In 1941, Erich Mendelsohn came to the United States, and Kahn gave him space. He wasn't a partner, but or anything like that, but he gave him space to work, drawing boards, staff, whatever was necessary for him to do his creative work.
When the United States entered the Second World War, it became clear that the Art Deco lifestyle wouldn't prevail. The social disruptions called for new ways of living, and therefore a new architecture. It had already set foot in Europe, and one of its most prominent advocates was Le Corbusier. His concept of a modern architecture with open floor plans by putting the building's foundations on pillars or using curved concrete walls caught on in the US as well. Also due to Ely Jacques Kahn's patronage, he made the acquaintance of a promising young architect at Le Corbusier's offices.
He took in a younger partner, Robert Allen Jacobs, in 1940. And Jacobs also was not only young, but he had very good contacts through his wife's family, the Coleman family, whose business was the Philip Morris Tobacco Company. And so together they formed an alliance and a firm.
A completely new architectural language was the result. This freestanding concrete sculpture was a cooperation between Kahn and Jacobs, and it doesn't want to hide its proximity to Le Corbusier's works. The city and its mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, celebrated it as an architectural landmark. Kahn was back in Manhattan's real estate business because he was able to adapt to change. He also cherished making contact with young architects like Elsa Guidoni Mandelstam, who had emigrated to New York in 1938. She managed the construction of the Universal Pictures Building, which was considered a milestone for post-war architecture. It is one of the first buildings in New York with a glass-clad front. Guidoni's window measurements became an industry standard, and the building was the first with central air conditioning.
When I got here, Universal was here, you had movie director Martin Scorsese. I've seen Nicolas Cage, Leonardo DiCaprio, when he was first starting out. I mistaked him for a delivery boy. So I was like, can I help you? And he said, yeah, I'm going to the 7th floor. And I'm like, especially because I know who's on that floor, and they kind of know that I'm not big on the fans, so they kind of laughed. And she goes, Andre, you don't know who that is, do you? And I said, no, I don't know who it is, and I really don't care to know.
The Seagram Building is considered a 20th century myth come to life, and it still serves as a model for the typical skyscraper. It's impossible to elude the appeal of its skin and bone structure. Ely Jacques Kahn supported his colleague Ludwig Mies van der Rohe by providing all his knowledge and experience. Being 74 years old now, he has become the supporting architect in this project. Everything breathes art here, from the open plaza to the masterful paintings in the lobby and the elegant restaurants, as art was Kahn's lifeblood.
And then after he retired, so I'm thinking this would have been the mid to late 60s, he would come to Truro on Cape Cod, where we had a summer home, and he would paint. He would go out in the yard, set up an easel, and paint trees, sand dunes, the house. And those are lovely images. I have a couple of those. They're lovely, and they're very informal, and another side of him. I guess it was a year or two after he died, so probably 1973 or 74, I got a call from Lieselot, who said, I've got something for you. Would you come by for tea? So I went to 1185 Park Avenue, and we sat down. We had nice tea and had conversation. And she said, your grandfather asked me to give you something. And came out with this cardboard box and brought it over. And I opened it up, and it was about 20 hand-painted silk bow ties, the designs of which he'd created. And she said he wanted you to have these. Now, I'd never worn a bow tie in my life, as far as I can remember at that point. I didn't know how to tie one. And I wore those ties every day.